Hello and welcome to Infinity. I'm Charlie Seraphin. For the next half hour, we're going to be exploring ancient mystical traditions. Our guest is Gay Luce. Gay Luce has a PhD in psychology, having studied at Radcliffe and Stanford. She is currently directing a program dealing with the rediscovery of the ancient mystical traditions. Before we start, let's talk about some words. Mystery, mystical, and mysticism. Are they the same, or are there differences? And if they're the same, what do they mean?
I think they have different connotations, but they really come from the same root. And the root is a Greek root which means to be silent. It's the same root as the word mute. It means keep quiet about this because this is ineffable and it can't be explained in the usual way.
Okay, end of interview. We can't go any further because we can't talk about it. We're going to make an attempt at discussing what we should be silent about because we really can't talk about it. So I guess that's the disclaimer.
And the mystery schools of ancient Egypt and Greece and the Druids and so forth all had a tradition of secrecy. And in fact, a lot of traditions that are coming to light now, like the Sufi tradition and so forth, really the secrecy is for two reasons. Number one, that as you begin to liberate yourself from limiting beliefs, you're likely to believe things that your neighbor doesn't believe. So if you talk about them, you'll be thought to be crazy. That's number one. Number two, some of the experiences you have as you shift your own physiology and point of view are going to be so far out that somebody would think you were on a drug experience and you couldn't explain it. These all were very common in the mystery traditions. The thing that was different about the old mystery schools from our present is that they didn't separate sacred and profane knowledge. They realized that this was one universe. This God-created or divinely created universe, however you want to put it, is one universe, and we make the divisions. So when they taught someone, they didn't just teach them to have mystical visions of glory and how to heal and so on. They taught them agriculture, philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, all the hard sciences as they had them then. But they didn't separate. You know, and if you really look at science now, you could say look at something like the computer, which works on a kind of on-off binary system mainly. That's the basic system of most religions, which know that positive and negative energy, or yin and yang, are the forces of the universe. So it's like, instead of separating computer school as something not sacred, the old mystery schools would have taken it in, and Plato and Pythagoras and Christ would all have learned those things.
Are there elements of mysticism that really go beyond the human ability to explain? Is there a danger in translating something that is a mystical experience into words because words don't do it justice?
That's a really good question. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, yes. I think what happens is we begin to think that the words really relay the experience, and the words never can. The words are puny next to the experience.
When the ancients incorporated agriculture, mathematics, astronomy with the mystical teachings all in one, has man always been concerned with that which he could not see?
I think so. I think we have evidence from the deepest caves that back in the recesses that you could hardly believe people could crawl to, much less get fire into to see, they have depicted figures that must be shamanic or religious figures trying to generate in other people the mystical experience by visual art and also teaching that way.
The skeptics attribute that those drawings and the belief system to human imagination, that these things were all made up. The believers say these are the ancient truths and are constant through time. Where are we on that?
Well, it depends on what you believe. I think that's, again, a good question. But let me say, Charlie, one of the things that's happened is when I first started getting interested in these things in the early 1970s, I'd been in India and I had been exposed to some things I couldn't understand. I wanted to go see firewalkers because I didn't believe it. I was a scientist at that time, and I didn't believe that people could walk on fire. There had to be some trickery. Well, now we know that just as the mind can shift, can make us ill or heal, it can shift our physiology and we can walk on fire. And people are doing it in droves. And I think a lot of other questions are going to be answered in the same way. Maybe the cave paintings will reveal to us what they really were there to teach. I don't think we know yet.
Is there a danger that we're getting ahead of ourselves with a lot of people going out and walking on fire? Is there a purpose? And have we lost sight, perhaps, of what the ancients' purpose was in these types of demonstrations?
I think we are exceedingly fortunate because we're living at a time of media when you and I can sit here and talk and be talking to all of you out there, and there are just so many people that we can be exposed so that perhaps the human race in time will realize that this is one universe, that all of this is divine, and that we need to start behaving that way, put ourselves in alignment with what's divine, and stop warring among ourselves and creating destruction. So I think that the walking on fire is like a signal to people that they aren't put together the way they were told. I think it's a very important signal. I think it's very important that this comes at a time of media, that some of you put great people on the air, great sages are seen on television, that the human collective can begin to feel this swell of an inner understanding. That's what we're made out of. We're created out of this.
When and how did we get off the track in the West?
Well, some people say it was around 1913. I don't know. I don't know what's sacred about that date. But if you take a look at the dollar bill, for example, and you see the pyramid and the eye, what you realize is that the Great Seal of the United States represented a mystical tradition, and that leadership, even if it was rebellious leadership, was always founded on something deeper than pragmatic values and just the boundaries of politics. So I think maybe when people say 1913, that's when leadership was firmly severed from anything that had to do with the divine. I'm not sure how. But you see, our presidents, we ask ourselves perhaps now the question, I ask myself a lot, how come this Constitution that was written by 25-year-olds 200 years ago is good enough that we still refer to it? It's still our legal mainstay. It's our center post. How did they have the wisdom? Well, those guys were Masons. They were Rosicrucians. They had wisdom pouring into them from the mystery traditions. They weren't trying to rest on their own small conditioning and knowledge. And so the inherent underpinning of the United States is a leadership that was mystical.
And when did we get back on that track? When did the interest begin to rekindle? In the 60s with the Beatles going to India and the popularization of Eastern traditions?
There have always been people here, There have been undercover people. But I think, somewhere in the 60s, after that tremendously dead period of the 50s, when the 60s came alive and people began to respond in music and in form, and also the 50s were the time of the diaspora of the Tibetans. Now, a very important thing has happened with a lot of, when China invaded Tibet. They fulfilled a prophecy that was made in the 7th century. When the fire ox runs on wheels and iron birds shall fly, then shall the Tibetans be scattered like ants across the world and take the Dharma to the land of the red man in the West. This prophecy was fulfilled in the 50s, and by the 60s and 70s, these people began coming and teaching here. And we have a wave of people coming in from the East because by this time, I think, the people who've been brought up in the Christian churches, and maybe some of the other, I don't know my own church very well, the Jewish religion. My parents, while Jewish in background, were very agnostic. So I didn't have a tradition to rely on. I only knew that the truth was that this wasn't a material world. And so people were beginning to find that out. And so I think a whole generation of people have had to find it out from the East instead of from their own home ground.
How can we, in today's world, incorporate some of the basic elements of the ancient traditions? Let's talk about Buddhism. Is there a way that we can gain from that tradition without shaving our heads or moving to a monastery?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked me about that one first, because it's my favorite. Buddhism has so much to offer us psychologically. I mean, first of all, what Buddha did was he laid down essentially it was like E equals MC squared. His Four Noble Truths really say to us, what is the cause of suffering? You know, I look around and I see that there's suffering in this world. Well, first is, everything changes. The sun and the moon are in constant change. So if you seek to stabilize something, including your image of yourself, I am such and such a kind of person, and stay that way for very long, what you're going to find out is you're resisting the forces of nature, and it hurts. And that's true of relationships, it's true of jobs, it's true of physical things, although we don't see the decay, atomic decay going on just right around us, but it's happening. The physical world is alive. The atoms that make up the physical world are as alive as the atoms that make us up, full of space and charge and light. And so the Buddhists offer us this noble truth. One, everything's changing. So if you're resisting that, and if you're not willing to be in the present moment, you can't be with what's changed. You can't be with now because you're holding something back. Number two, yes, there is suffering, and there's a way out of suffering. And the way is, and then what follows is the path. Now, we don't need to get into the 52 this and the 63 that, but we do know that there's some fundamental things that really add up to many of the fundamentals of our Bible, our Christian Bible. Right livelihood, right action, right speech. If we tell each other the truth, then we will not need to get into enormous legal wrangles about contracts broken, because we will make promises that we keep. We will be honest with one another. And I know, even with the best intentioned parents in the world, that I was taught up to hide things. You know, I am, as an adult, trying to strip away some of the veils that have been put between me and you, because I've been taught not to tell you the truth. Do you like this? No. Instead I say, well, it's very nice, and so on, and beat around the bush, instead of saying what the truth is. But if I said the truth, I'd clear up a lot of confusion. And Buddhist psychology is very deep. Now, Buddhism is different in China, Japan, and Tibet. I studied with a very great Tibetan teacher who is here in this area. I was just so fortunate that Tarthang Tulku Rinpoche, which is the title of this great man, came to Berkeley, and I was brought to Berkeley on an impulse that led me to the Nyingma Institute where he teaches. What I learned is that the Tibetans 1,400 years ago were practicing psychological therapies that we're just beginning to learn in the West. You know, like the body therapies, that we are beginning to realize body and feeling and thought are all linked, and that you can't just transform one without the other. In other words, it's nice to change your mental attitudes, but if they don't translate into action through your emotions and your body, you're going to keep repeating patterns. And they had a very refined technology. So these things are all things that Buddhism has to offer us, along with a very deep philosophy, art, and a mystical tradition that can take people to understanding realms of experience that aren't easily translated into the ordinary. That is, they take a little quiet. The Buddhists have brought us forms of meditation, of ways of harmonizing our minds and relaxing, of getting away from the surface chatter that distracts us so much from our deeper selves. And these anybody can take. Anybody can do 20 minutes of this kind of meditation, just watching the mind becoming a more conscious human being.
Is there something about people in the West that makes us more compartmentalized and less apt to integrate things the way that you talked about earlier that the ancients were able to do? The mind-body connection, the agriculture with a spiritual tradition, and this sort of thing. We seem to have, church is the place we go for a spiritual experience, and the job is the place we go for a work experience, and home is where we go for a relaxing experience or whatnot. There's a place and a time for everything.
I think industrialization did that. And I think what's going to have to happen in the information age, which is following the industrial age, is that we begin to reclaim ourselves. There are things happening right now to do that. I know consultants, for example, who bring spiritual ideas and psychology into companies. After all, in a way, if you think about it, to me, a corporation is like a huge ashram. Where do you spend most of your time? And where are most of the people that you interact with on a no-fooling business? It's your business place. So you might as well love them. And you might as well start practicing the religious, precepts right there. And I think some people are beginning to get that idea and try to unify it. And other things are happening of that sort. I mean, here we are sitting and talking. We couldn't have had this conversation, 15 years ago on the air.
Let's talk about some specific groups, if we can, and some specific traditions, and maybe find if we can identify some of the key concepts that we have inherited from them. The Druids. What did the Druids give us?
Well, they gave us an incredible sense of the calendar, of the march of the cosmos across the sky and the way it's reflected on Earth. They also left us a legacy that we've tended to try and stamp out. See, early Druidism and Christianity meshed. And then somewhere, I don't know if my dates are correct, but around the 9th century, the Druids began to be persecuted, and Christianity and Druid leadership were really separated. Now the Druids, if this has a real connotation now. I think the real reason that the Irish and the English are not getting along has nothing to do with present-day politics. It has to do with the fact that deep mystical knowledge, as passed through the Celtic customs of the Druids, needed singing. The bardic tradition, poetry and song were the ways of remembering the vast storehouse of knowledge, of mystical knowledge and practical knowledge that were combined in the fingers of the hand, in the names of the trees and their fruits. In other words, the oak tree, the hazelnut tree, all these trees that are mentioned in Irish folklore and poetry, these are not simply nice tree names that somebody happened to like. These are sacred trees. They have qualities. The oak tree of the Druids was the cross. They stripped an oak of all branches but the cross. The cross is one of the earliest symbols in all of these traditions, and most traditions have a cross. So what we see is that poetry and song, which have come down to us, and the Irish are past masters, when they are allowed to revive what they truly know in the bardic tradition, we will be flooded with a kind of knowledge of the oceans and of the stars and of great magnitude that's been lost since their voices were cut down by the church.
What about the ancient Egyptians? What did we get from them?
We're going to get a lot more soon, I think. From the ancient Egyptians, we got a lot of mathematics. Everything was measured. There's a wonderful book that I'd like to mention, just in case anybody is venturesome enough to go see it. It's a small book called The Temple of Man by Schwaller de Lubitsch. He was an archaeologist who spent his whole life studying one temple in Luxor. What he discovered when he measured it was that the proportions of this massive temple were set to the proportions of the human body. And each time an initiate came through a particular gate, he was passing through what is known as a chakra or energy center in the human body. And the way the paintings were done on the walls was so that they could know, they'd learn from the hieroglyphs and paintings on one side up to a certain point in their knowledge. When they were ready for the other side, they went to the other side of the window. They were initiated into the next room, which was from the throat into the pituitary region. And then they had a whole different kind of knowledge. Now, the concept also of the voyage of death and preparation for death has come to us from the Egyptians. But I think they had a technology we're only beginning to discover. And there are many psychics think that there's a hall of records sitting under the foot of the Sphinx. See, the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid of Giza were built perhaps many thousands of years earlier than we date it. And there are lots of reasons to suppose that. They were built, the pyramid was a crystal. It was not a burial place. It's a crystal, and in it are energy centers. And initiates were put in them because this enormous crystal, which has an awesome energy field around it, just to be in it is to feel something incredible. It is focusing celestial energy to a certain point within itself. Now, it was used as an astronomical laboratory to tell the precession of the equinoxes, which the Egyptians knew. They knew very long time cycles. They knew a lot about agriculture. It was used as a marker to cast a shadow for, how do you call it when people make sightings and measure land? Surveying techniques. These technologies are only the surface of what Egypt had to offer us, and perhaps it wasn't Egypt. Many people would surmise that a great culture that was dying came to Egypt before the flood, built the pyramid on solid stone, because Giza is stone, and it's run through with tunnels underneath. There are rooms in which it is thought that we will, when we're spiritually and psychically ready, discover a spiritual technology from a time known as Atlantis, the Atlantis that Plato writes about. And Plato was, of course, an initiate for at least 13 years in Egypt.
Okay.
I am only beginning to, you could talk about Egypt forever.
That's a separate program in and of itself.
Yes.
What about Native Americans? Let's get closer to home. What lasting traditions have we incorporated? And I know there are many. We can just touch on a few.
And right now, I think it's a very important time because the resurgence of this great knowledge. I would like to just say that, for me, the greatest one is a sense of where we are at all times, a sense of ecology. And I'll give a personal story. I hit a tree at 55 miles an hour last year and shouldn't have lived. I did somehow. And my program met 2 weeks later. I was carried there. And the man who worked with us was a Navajo shaman. He did a sand painting for me and had me take some of the sacred sand back to the tree in the site of the accident to heal the tree and heal the ground that I had destroyed. And only then did I really begin to feel that I was healed and I was functioning. We have, in the medicine wheel, all the directions, the sense of all the directions, the sense of being part of north, south, east, west, up, down, the whole cosmos and all ancestry at one time. I think that ecological sense, among the many powers that our Native Americans have, is a gift to us at this particular time when we're very fractionated.
Are there new traditions that are growing up even as we speak? Are there new mystical traditions?
Yes, there are. Yes, there are. And they're combining things. I think one of the reasons that the ancient mystery schools are coming to light now, we're very different people than the people who were taught in these traditions. We're very heterogeneous. We're more ego-developed. And you have to develop an ego before you lose it. We're in lots of ways very strong. We're also stubborn-headed and hard to teach too. But so some of these new mystery traditions that are growing up are a synthesis of old and things that could only happen now.
Is there a danger of losing in the translation there, that we misinterpret based on current conditions, or is that an impossibility?
I can't answer that. I don't know. I think that some of the new synthesizing comes out of a culture that came out of drugs. That people opened their eyes and saw there was something. Now, drugs can't do it. So they had to go back and find out what was it that could emancipate them from the strictures of a world that's very narrow, you know? How could we undo that limiting belief and begin to see beyond it into the universal magnificence that we have to play with? We're put here to develop in, you know?
We live in an age of consumer awareness. There's one individual listening right now who says, yes, I have a spiritual path. Yes, I would like to rediscover or discover a mystical tradition, but how do I separate the fraud, if it exists out there, from the true spiritual path? How will I know whether these things, whether it's an incantation or a meditative technique or anything else, is legitimate for me or not?
Well, I would say the very most important thing is to listen to yourself. Every one of us has an inbuilt crap detector. And we really do know, only we don't listen to ourselves. In what I teach, the one thing I really hope for people is that they become totally autonomous. And that's what every great teaching leads toward, accepting that the traditions of the past got encrusted with hierarchy. And people got into doing the rituals which were to take them somewhere and forgot they were supposed to go somewhere, got all involved in the rituals themselves. I think anybody has to, I would say one thing as caution, and that is don't try and jump for the moon. First, everything takes place. If you want it to take place easily, don't jump for the dramatic conversion, because that's usually dangerous. Jump for slowly beginning to relax the mind, slowly beginning to see what the inner self can tell you. And trust yourself when you're really quiet, when you're not thinking with the outer mind.
I sense an excitement in you, in your presence, in what we're discussing, as if just around the corner is something really big. What is it, and when are we going to get there?
It's not around the corner. It's sitting in us right now. And all we have to do is start taking off the beliefs, the doubts, the resistances to going inside. The universe is right here. And life is if you look at your reality, it's a mirror of your beliefs. If you don't like your reality, shift your beliefs and your reality will change. Because we are in a magical universe. And we create our experience.
You are what you think you are, not what you eat?
Absolutely. But maybe not even what you think you are consciously. You really have to get down underneath there.
This is Infinity. Remember to keep your mind open and listen to your heart. I'm Charlie Seraphin. Thank you for listening.